My name is Jonathan Fusaro. I'm a graduate student at Utah State University.
And what do you do as a graduate student?
I'm a wildlife biology major, getting my master's degree.
And specifically, what kind of animals do you study?
Right now my work's on black bear, North American black bear.
And how did you get interested in that?
Black bear I've always been interested in since I was a kid. They're really interesting animals, very smart, and they let you allow you to work in some really amazing places.
And where did you grow up? Where were you a kid?
Rhode Island is the town or the state I'm originally from.
And so black bears live, where do they live?
Well, right now the population has been expanding into their historic ranges all across North America, and Rhode Island was in fact part of their historic range, and they're starting to show up there. A few individuals have popped in there. And in California, black bears resided mostly in the eastern Sierra, and then now the populations are throughout California in a lot of different places.
Because one of my friends thought that they weren't indigenous to the eastern Sierras.
Well, it goes based on historic records, and as far as we know that they're in the Sierras. They mostly were on the west side. We don't have direct evidence saying yes or no that they were on the east side. So it may be a new. It may be that the population is new on the east side.
The fun part about studying bears.
Working in the Sierras really is amazing, and I really like working with the people too. So it's fun to hear, how people feel about bears that they live around with. They're just amazing animals.
And now, why did you pick this area as one of the study areas?
Well, the town of Mammoth Lakes is my urban study site for my research, and Mammoth is the perfect small town to do this. Small as in it makes it easier to perform an experiment in the study that I did. And they have a long history of bears living in and amongst the people in the community. So it was a great study area. And the biologist that worked with me to develop this project, it was his idea from the start, and he's wanted to do some work in the Sierras for a long time, and finally we're able to pull some money together to do that.
And who was that?
The biologist named Tim Taylor out of California Fish and Wildlife.
Okay. And then specifically, how did you pick sites around town to collect your fur samples?
It's a systematic process established by a number of other researchers doing similar type of work. And so the way it works is you lay a grid system over your study area, and you place these hair snare devices within each one of the cells of that grid to get an even distribution of sampling locations.
And what did you expect to find when you first started this? Anything in particular? What were you looking for?
Yeah, well, our hypothesis was that there was between 25 and 30 bears in town every year. And you never know what you're really going to get. So after spending time in the field and collecting the hair from these bears and getting to talk with the public, it seemed like our estimates were pretty close anecdotally. And then now that we've had some of our preliminary results come back, in fact, we were really close. We counted a minimum count of 32 individuals in town for 2012.
And now, are bears territorial? Is that a lot for the square meters that you?
Sure. Well, they're not technically territorial in the sense that they would defend a particular area like a mountain lion would. And from what I understand about bears, and I'm not a bear expert, but the more time I spend studying, the more I'm getting to know, they will be really tolerant if there's plenty of natural food available, and as well as if they're in an urban environment and there's plenty of food for them. They're more tolerant of living close proximity and at higher densities. And so, they may protect a certain food source for a period of time, but they tend not to, defend their territories as if a mountain lion will.
And so at your talk, you mentioned something about bears do actually move out of the area, though. Why do they do that? Or male bears? Male bears.
Well, male bears that are born into an area, they want to avoid what they call inbreeding avoidance. And they don't want to mate with their sisters and their mothers. So the theory is that they leave the area to find their own home range, and then therefore find mates that aren't, genetically similar, is the theory.
And so do you think that's why they're showing up in some places they haven't been seen very often?
It's something that we believe may be happening, and it would need to be tested to be certain. But we do have more individuals showing up in communities outside of Mammoth Lakes in the neighboring area, and it's possible that they're coming from Mammoth Lakes. We're not certain exactly, but that's one of our questions we'd like to answer next in a further study.
Okay. So in other words, you don't know, you haven't taken snare samples in Crowley or Ravenna?
We do have some samples that we collected opportunistically from when bears broke into homes or cars in those areas, and I'm waiting on those results to come back. We also have some samples from bears that were hit on the road or hunters harvested in certain areas, so we may be able to get a sense for some movement in and out of Mammoth Lakes. So we'll have the samples in Mammoth to compare to those outside of the town.
And so what kind of findings or results are you still, you still have to do a lot of analysis, right?
Sure, yeah.
So what kind of things do you think you'll find?
Well, after I run the closed population estimates, so the statistical analysis we're going to run, like I said, we have minimum count right now from the genetics lab of how many individuals there are. But based on how the study goes with the recapturing of these individuals, it's called the mark recapture estimate, we may actually show that there's more individuals in town than what our minimum count was. And that's what we presume, because we're not capturing all animals. We're going to miss some. So these statistical analyses will help us determine that.
And what's one of the most surprising things you found out to date?
Well, you know, we don't know a lot about the bear densities in the Eastern Sierra at all. And I believe that we had, in the wildland study area, Slinkard Valley, it's the Department of Fish and Wildlife owned property, and there's some Forest Service in there as well. We believe there was probably about 15 individual bears in there, and we ended up counting in 2012 a minimum count of 40 individuals that came into that study area. And some of those may be permanent residents that stay there, other ones may have been just passing through, but we did count that many individuals. And that's only an area of about 70 square kilometers that we were sampling that many bears. So that was really surprising. Just, you know, having spent time in the field, you kind of think you have a sense for how many are out there, and we were, it was a lot higher than we thought.
Yeah, well, and 30 seems like a lot in town. I mean, we see a few, but
sure.
30?
Sure. Yeah, it does seem like a lot. And, you know, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it really depends on a social tolerance. And there's other elements that potentially could be negatively affect the wildland bear population as a result of the anthropogenic causes of mortality. So yeah, we're not certain if these bears are truly resident. Like I said, we were capturing a short period of time, 6 weeks is when the sampling was. And we assume that they're staying in town, but there's a good chance that many of those individuals are coming from the wildland areas and coming into town for a short period and leaving.
Right, so when you say you had 30 different individuals, that doesn't mean they're living in town.
No, and we conducted the study from 2010 till 2012, so we did sampling period each year. In 2010, we were unsuccessful because nobody's done hair snaring and surveying bears in this way in an urban environment, and it was a pilot season. We made, I wouldn't say mistakes, but it was a bit of trial and error to figure out how to do this experiment. And in 2011, we were successful in getting the amount of samples that we needed, and we counted for 2007 14 individuals. And in 2012, we counted 30. And the reason why 2011 may have been less is because some of our samples were damaged either by the elements and by climate, or maybe there was an issue in the lab what they had, and we're still looking at the reason for that. But we had 7 individuals captured both years. So there's some that are in here every year. Whether or not they're staying in town, we don't know about exact movements.
All right. You know, one of the most unusual things I've seen as far as a bear goes, one time behind Horseshoe Lake, I was just wandering around in the woods, and I saw a bear climb up in this tree and like way up into a sugar pine, I think it was, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
And he shook the tree. So what do you think he was doing?
You know, it's tough to say. I would have had to been there to see what was going on. You know, it's possible he was trying to just find a nice nook to take a nap, or he was shaking it to get the pine cones off. At certain times of the year, they will eat portions of the pine cone. And so that's something, you know, like I said, I'm not a bear expert, so I'm not certain what he would be doing exactly, and I'd have to see the situation, but it's possible that's what was going on.
Huh.
Yeah.
And then when he came down, he actually backed down, but when he was like a good 15 feet off the ground or more,
Yeah.
he turned around and jumped out of the tree.
Wow. Yeah. Just more efficient, didn't care. I mean, there is a lot of muscle. They're really strong animals. They're capable of doing a lot of, you know, they can run up to 30 miles an hour. And you think an animal that weighs that much and looks that big and doesn't seem to move that fast, they're very athletic, you could say. Yeah.
Yeah. So now if people encounter them, I mean, again, you're not an expert, but does anything come to mind as far as what a person should do if they get close to a bear or see a bear?
Sure. It's case by case, but in general, you want to give them your distance. You know, they are animals, they're wild animals, and they are unpredictable. Despite that they do habituate to people and get used to being around people, your best bet is to give them their space. And, you know, if you feel like you want to take a picture, just do it as far away as you can, really. Respect the animal and try not to further habituate them to being used to people, which means, of course, don't feed the bears. Yeah.
And you think that they can continue to live in an urban environment like this and get along with people? Do you think?
Time will tell. Time will tell. It's really interesting. There's people on both sides of the spectrum that really love the bears in town. They're okay with living with them, and there's other people that believe that they do not belong in town and they don't want them in town. So it's one of those interesting situations. These bears, the state, they're everybody's bears. The entire state manages, California Fish and Wildlife manages the bears. But when you have a town like Mammoth Lakes that has potentially a resident bear population, the community feels ownership over those bears. They want to either protect them or they want to protect their own home and their own property and their safety. So it's an interesting challenge, and it's become more and more common across North America with black bears as well as other wildlife.
And just, I guess, is going backwards a little bit, but does it work, or which works better, if one works better than the other, as far as relocating a bad bear or continuing to train a bad bear with rubber bullets or noise?
Sure.
Flash?
There's been a lot of effort with biologists testing different methods to essentially reduce human-wildlife conflicts and human-bear conflicts specifically. And it appears that there is no what I'd call silver bullet for solving these wildlife issues and human-wildlife issues. In reality, each one of these things is a tool and toolbox. They're effective in a certain way, and some of them are more effective at long-term behavioral changes, and other ones are more effective, in the short term, just immediate human safety. And take, for example, like you said, the translocation. A lot of biologists say that if you take a bear that's habituated and food conditioned and used to people and you move it into another place, they're just going to do it in somebody else's backyard. So you're essentially taking your problem and giving it to somebody else. And that's not really well accepted by biologists. Most biologists say, no, I don't want your bears. Don't put them in my backyard. So yeah, it's a real challenging situation to deal with bears that are used to people and are food conditioned.
And now, as far as the samples that you've got, are you excited about the next step, and what is that?
Yeah, the next step is probably the most I'm excited for sure. And it all pens funding and getting the support from the Department of Fish and Wildlife as well as the community. And the next step will be to look more closely at these human-wildlife conflicts. And ideally, it would be important to take the public's perspective on what they think our current management is doing right now and what they do and don't like about it. And if we have proposed management tactics that we want to implement, we'd like to know what they think about those. Are they good or are they bad? And other states have done this before, and they're moving in that direction to work with the public, because it's really important that as scientists, we often want to just rely on the data, and we want to rely on what we think is biologically makes sense. But really, it's often the human tolerance for certain things. And so we need to kind of bring those two things together, the human dimensions and the science, and try and educate the people on what we're trying to do, and also accept their feedback, that it's ultimately their decision what they want to do with the wildlife of their state that they live in. Mm-hmm.
So even if you have certain facts, people could or advice, they might not agree and still decide to do it their own way.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that's how California Fish and Wildlife, the regulations and the laws work in this state with wildlife. And it's interesting when, as a biologist, you say, for example, there are other studies out there that say that urban environments can be have negative effects on wildland bear populations. And we don't know for sure if that's happening in Mono County or in California or Mammoth Lake specifically, but it could be happening. And the major goal of the department is to conserve the species. And so if we're not able, we as in the Department of Fish and Wildlife or biologists aren't able to explain that properly to the public, and for them to realize if our ultimate goal is to conserve the species, and we have a situation in the urban environment where that is potentially depleting the wildland bear population, then we can't do much more besides educate them and try to guide them in the right decision, and ultimately they're going to make the decision. And so they'll have to basically live with the decision they make, and us biologists will have to keep moving forward with trying to, understand what that new situation may be and how to help the people and the wildlife all at the same time. Yeah.
And so how are we going to be able to follow what you're doing and find out the results after you do?
Well, like I said, I'm a master's student, and I am wrapping up my final, essentially my final project here, my thesis, in the next few months. And after that, I don't work for the Department of Fish and Wildlife at this point permanently, so I'd like to do that, and that would be the next stage that I would hopefully help move this project forward and start looking at the more human-wildlife conflicts. The other biologists in this area are very interested as well, so we hope that it would continue forward regardless of whether I'm here. But I'd be happy to be a part of the process, for sure.
So hopefully we'll see you back here?
Yeah, I hope so. It's a beautiful place, and it's really great working with bears and working with the people and trying to mitigate these human-wildlife conflicts. Yeah.